Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Download, where we connect the dots for you, coming to you live from Church Milton headquarters here in the Archdiocese of Detroit. Today is, of course, the eve of the 500th anniversary of Martin Luther's Protestant revolt, a revolt that ripped the world from its authentic Christian moorings and set in motion a string of events that would end in near destruction of morality. Luther has received a seemingly endless parade of praise, much of it coming even from Catholic sources, many of them Catholic clergy. But what he set in motion needs to be properly understood, not just theologically, which is the most important, but also politically and culturally. So today, Simon is going to look at a new documentary on Luther produced by some very fine, great people in Poland. Christine is going to look at how Luther's influence extended to some of the most evil men in world history. And Brad is going to talk about how Luther essentially blew up the world of philosophy. Simon, let's start with you. It's a nice way to get into this whole discussion.
Yeah, so there are some chaps in Poland. I'm not going to try to pronounce his first name. It's Grzegorza Brauna. Anyway, Grzegorza Brauna.
Call him
Greg in Poland. He is a good guy, and he is coming up with a documentary called Luther and the Protestant Revolution. It is set to premiere in Poland and in Polish on November the 12th, and they are planning to do an English-language version of it, which they hope to release on DVD and Blu-ray. Now, I'm not sure that translating it into English, though, is really necessary, because if we just take a look at the trailer here, you'll see some wonderful visuals that really convey the message without any words being needed. Roll tape. That's just a masterpiece of the style of art that Catholic Poland has been producing for a long time.
Excellent.
A wonderful sort of visual representation of what's happening. Obviously, we see the whole history there of Europe coming through. Luther appears on the scene, and everything quite literally falls apart. And that's one of the things, one of the points that they're making. But another very important point that they're making is to tie in the influence of Luther on Central European politics within the 19th, 20th, and 21st centuries. Now, Christine is going to talk about a couple of characters who were influenced by Luther's positions in sort of the latter period
you might have
of
heard
that.
Of some of them.
You will have heard of some of them. This chap you probably have heard of, if you know anything about European history, Otto von Bismarck. He was the Chancellor of Germany during World War I and prior to it, and he was seen by many as kind of a warmonger who started World War I, which obviously led on to the modern European states and this sort of situation. But an interesting thing that von Bismarck did was something called Kulturkampf, cultural struggle in German, which was a deliberate attempt, very organized, to limit the influence of the Catholic Church in Germany. And this was all inspired by Luther's visceral hatred for all things Catholic. So don't go around thinking that Luther's revolt was just, let's make the Bible available for people. This was a pernicious hatred against others that led to a very real persecution in Germany prior to the horrors that we saw in World War I. Von Bismarck was laying the groundwork.
Yeah, I mean, Luther was just absolutely nuts in the head.
Yeah.
And, like some other clerics who use their priesthood to kind of deal with their own psychological stuff. Some of them even have the same name. This is what's going on here. I mean, Luther is... Again, that's a very good point. I have to stress that. This isn't just like, the church is holding on to the Bible, let's make it available. No, that's the way many of the Protestant denominations paint it. But there was something far deeper and more psychologically disturbed going on.
Absolutely.
In who might he have influenced?
Well, we need to remember Martin Luther was the catalyst for the greatest schism in Western Christendom, which we have never yet recovered from. And in addition to hating Catholics, there was another group he hated, Jews. Anti-Semitism is just rife through his writings. And there's just been a great whitewash of Luther today. People don't want to talk about it, but here, he called them poisonous and venomed worms, his words. In his earlier period, he wanted to convert the Jews to Christianity, but as he got older, he started realizing or thinking, well, they're just, you can't convert them, so really, we just need to basically destroy all of them. So he said Jewish synagogues and schools should be set on fire, their prayer books should be destroyed, rabbis should be forbidden to preach, their homes should be burned down, their property and money should be taken, they should be shown no mercy or kindness, in his words, and they should be drafted into forced labor or expelled from the country utterly. He even went so far as to say, quote, "We are at fault in not slaying them," the Jews. Fast forward 400
years. Did he
years.
have a swastika on his...
Well, he actually got Jews expelled from Saxony in 1537, and in the 1540s he actually got some Jews expelled from various German towns. Fast forward 400 years, his book, which was titled On the Jews and Their Lives, where he says all of this anti-Semitic stuff, that same book was actually displayed by the Nazis during their Nuremberg rallies, this same book. And historians now pretty much agree that Luther laid the groundwork for the Holocaust. I mean, he was praised up and down by numerous Nazi officials, saying that he was a true German, he was a German of their times. Hitler himself wrote about Luther in Mein Kampf, and he said Luther was a great warrior, a true statesman, and a great reformer. And one historian, Wilhelm Rocky, said, quote, "Without any question, Lutheranism influenced the political, spiritual, and social history of Germany in a way that, after careful consideration of everything, can be described only as fateful." So there's just no doubt whatsoever that Luther's anti-Semitism played a crucial part in the Holocaust. Now, another dictator who was influenced by Luther was Erich Honecker. This is the communist leader of East Germany from 1971 to 1989. He was the primary organizer of building the Berlin Wall. He was also responsible for the order to shoot on sight anyone trying to scale that wall and escape to freedom. Now, after the collapse of the wall in 1989, he fled to the Chilean embassy in Moscow. He was then extradited to stand trial for human rights abuses. The trial they had to suspend it because of illness, and then he ended up going to Chile and dying there from old age, essentially. But in 1983, on the 500th anniversary of Luther's birthday, they wanted to mark the year as a special year honoring Luther, and he headed the committee, the Martin Luther Committee of the German Democratic Republic. And he hailed Luther as, quote, "one of the greatest sons of the German people, who contributed to social progress and world culture." He also described Luther as, quote, "the initiator of a great revolutionary movement." So these are at least two modern-day dictators whom Luther had a kind of a crucial influence on.
Yeah, it's you can't be surprised. I mean, if you introduce a drop of poison, doesn't matter sort of where it comes from. In this case, it was theological. But once it gets into the bloodstream, it travels to every organ. And the world of philosophy was not untouched by this.
But yeah, this whole faith alone thing, where private, subjective, internal interpretation of Scripture, once you start taking truth and saying, I'm the measure of my own truth, and there's no objective truth, it led into the Enlightenment age, where you have the Enlightenment philosophers who did the same thing. They took it to private interpretation of reason, though. And at this age of enlightenment, when all the wheels were coming off of the thought, these men were basically raging against what was called Thomism. Now, they got this from Luther and his own followers. They hated Thomism. Luther said the Summa was the source of all heresies. Basically, St. Thomas was the fountain of all heresies and error. And he said, as his books bear witness. So he was privately interpreting Luther's or St. Thomas's work. A guy who called this out happened to be a pope, Leo XIII, in 1893. Encyclical, he sutured together. He showed that the Enlightenment philosophers are really true sons of the Protestant reformers. He said, speaking of those relying on private judgment, hold Scripture to be the final appeal in matters of faith. He said, the rationalists, they're true children and inheritors of the older heretics. And this is the point, trusting in their turn to their own way of thinking, basically interpret reason. the way they will. And it totally destroyed the thought itself. They denied truth, and they actually destroyed the reasoning process. Leo XIII said the greatest defense for that was studying St. Thomas Aquinas. Now, the subjectivism that came out of private interpretation of Scripture and went into private interpretation of reason, along with destroying the morality, because it's whatever I think and I feel and I want, there is no morality then, along with the hatred for the Catholic Church specifically, led into, we had Germany, well, also in France, they had the French Revolution, which was all about the Enlightenment era and freedom from the Catholic Church, the Enlightenment philosophers pushing this, and you actually had the guillotine invented, and who was under the guillotine most often was Catholics. So very much so, for 500 years now, we've had a rage against reason. And St. Thomas, all he did was take reason, Aristotelian philosophy called the perennial philosophy, of objective truth outside of a man, and recognizing that, a thing called the natural law. This is the way the machine's put together by God. This is the way he wants it to operate. That's morality. What's hard about that?
Yeah, well, what's hard is living it.
Yeah.
People don't want to live it. So it's interesting if you take a look at sort of the whole Luther. Can we use some liberal theologians' vocabulary here? The Luther event. The Luther event, which is the ridiculous thing to say, the Christ event. No, that's the incarnation, is what we call that. But the whole thing surrounding Luther, if you look at this, he was not the first guy to come along with these ideas. So, there was, Jan Hus, who had been, executed 100 years earlier in what is modern-day Czechoslovakia. So you look and you say, well, what's different from him? Well, what's different is the time in which he appeared. Technology, and we bring this up to talk about technology. Technology had made a major leap forward with the printing press just essentially 50 years before Luther shows up on the scene. So he had the ability, because of that, to disseminate his message. And this is what has happened largely with the whole mainstream media. For the last 50, 60 years or so, they have sort of controlled the means of the message. And so you got everything. You got abortion, you got, contraception, divorce and remarry. You got everything because they kept pushing the narrative. Not just the news media, them also, but, the entertainment media, everything. Everything just kept pushing it. It's Marshall McLuhan, a great Catholic, very solid traditional Catholic philosopher in Canada, said in the 1950s, the medium is the message. And it's the first thing you learn in a communications class. Matter of fact, I think it's the only thing I learned in a communications class at Notre Dame. But anyway, that's it. Whoever controls that medium, it's their message that wins. And that's what Luther did.
Well, I think one of the things that really contributed, you talk about there was a foundation prior to Luther. One of the aspects of that foundation came from the fall of Constantinople. Highly cultural, great learned people, poets and artists and everybody that had the ability to influence culture, and they weren't Catholic. Constantinople was Orthodox. So there was always this bias against the Pope and a bias against the Catholic Church. And basically all of the tremendous migration from Byzantium, when in 1453 Constantinople fell to the Turks, the Muslims, all of those people fled to Europe. So now you have this huge amount of people who have tremendous ability to influence culture, and they're anti-Catholic. And that was in 1453. 1517, Luther's nailing his theses, 95 theses.
30 years after that, Luther's born.
So he's born in an age of tremendous influence in culture, which is actually based in anti-Catholic sentimentality, because that comes from the Orthodox, from Byzantium.
Yeah, but the thing that's just so frustrating about all this is that we have so many Catholic leaders around the world either commemorating or even in some cases celebrating the Reformation. But fortunately, Cardinal Mueller, of course, who used to head the Vatican's Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, he said last year, and he repeated again just a few days ago, there is no reason for Catholics to be celebrating the Reformation.
Yeah,
this caused a tragedy in the body of Christ. We've never recovered from it. No one should be celebrating it.
There's one thing I'd like to point out. When we had blind faith, and now you had blind reason, we came to blind emotion. We went through the phase of faith alone. Then we went, and that was the Reformation. Then we went through the phase of reason alone, pendulum swing. And then we went through a phase called the Romanticism, which was emotions alone. That was the last thing. You only have faith And you only have your
There's not that many dimensions to humanity.
you only have your intellect, your will, and your emotions. Where are we at right now? We were left with romanticism, which was follow your heart, and your emotions are king, and you got to be true to yourself, to your own heart, be true, and all this stuff. That's where we're at. If you want to understand where the modern age of Catholic sentimentality, it isn't sentimentality. It's emotions rule. You can't offend anyone. The joy of love and all this type of stuff. That's where we're at. It's not even about faith anymore. It's not even about reason anymore. Those have been destroyed, and now we're even destroying emotion. True, authentic.
Well, I think we've come to a kind of, to quote Taylor Swift, we've come to a sort of new romantics period, which, ironically, I think Miss Swift probably actually her albums do have something to say about that. In that, what you have is you have a construction where it's all about your feelings, but when reality doesn't comport to your feelings and you get wounded and you get damaged, you demand protection from your own errors. You demand protection from your own failings. I should not feel bad. Well, yes, you should. You took these steps and it logically ended up with you feeling emotionally bad. No. I need to be shielded and protected from that. And that is why we end up with the world of hate facts. It is now a post-romanticism in the sense that, yes, it's all about feelings, but it's not about feelings grounded in real things. The romantic era was, I want to do what makes me happy. I want to do what makes me feel joy. And people did truly pursue genuine things genuinely. Now it's, I just want to do this thing and I want to achieve an end result. You're not doing what will achieve the end result.
The exalting of faith,
You're
with
just
Luther, destroyed faith. The exalting of reason by the rationalists destroyed reason. The exalting and isolating of emotions, apart from the total human picture and God picture, destroyed emotions. And that's where we're at, with a bunch of destroyed emotions.
I
No
don't think
dialogue.
Civilization completely destroyed. If you go back to history, being the oldest guy on the panel, I like going back in history.
Much older.
A little bit older. We, look at how the stage was set for Luther. I mean, Luther pops on the scene in 1517, with the 95 Theses. But if you back up just 150 years, you had two huge problems in the church that helped set the stage for this. You had the what's referred to as the Babylonian captivity, the Avignon papacy, where for roughly 70 years, Europe's in this quandary. You've got some guy in, Rome was in such disrepair that there were cattle wandering in and out of the old St. Peter's Basilica. There was just nobody there. The population of Rome had dwindled to 10,000 people, which is just phenomenal.
We had the plague.
Well, the plague was going on at the same time as St. Catherine of Siena. So St. Catherine of Siena convinces, through God the Father, Pope goes back to Rome. But that's like 6 or 7 popes in a row. Then you get there, and immediately, almost on the heels of that, Martin V returns. The next pope, boom, you have the Western Schism. So for another, was it 42 years, I think it was, close to half a century? Here's this pope, and then there's this guy. The French go and elect their own pope, and then they kind of come to a compromise. They both agree to resign, and they elect another one, and then they both renege, and now you got 3 popes. And all this madness is going on, and it kind of just comes to an end, and Martin Luther's born. So you can understand, again, it's all this politicking and corruption and everything, and why the clergy can't get this notion through their head. Be faithful and, humble and lead people to God. Anything short of that, something's going to blow up. And here, you really got to blow up here.
Real quickly, just returning to this Polish documentary. It's kind of a first of its kind, and they're needing help in raising funds to finish their film production. Again, like Simon said, they will be producing an English language version, but we've written an article on it on our site. We'll link to it into the description. And if people want to send funds to help get this documentary off the ground, it reveals the real Luther, and I think people need to see it.
Yeah, they have. As part of it, I saw today as I was looking around the documentary, they have an image of Satan playing a set of bagpipes, but Luther's head is the bag of the bagpipes. Now, if you can't donate some money to have more art like that made, I don't know who you are.
That's
the greatest thing I've ever seen. It's fantastic. That's my new wallpaper right now on my phone. It's great.
Awesome. What saint was it? Was it Saint Teresa of Avila? Would have been Avila. A saint said during one of her excursions to hell that she saw Luther in hell, and I can't remember which saint it was. I remember reading that, going, "Oh, well, there we go." Well, you can't be surprised by it, but it's a good thing we have a reasonable hope all men are saved. That's it for now. Thanks for joining us. Please be sure and come back tomorrow for this great show we have here. Before we go, I want to remind you of something. We have, through Simon, largely Simon's efforts, we have our Where Did the Bible Come From set. This is today's Vortex subject, as a matter of fact. This is something that Protestants do not like to talk about because most of them don't really know much in the topic to talk about. The Bible's just sort of treated as this thing that got faxed down from heaven, and we just follow it blindly and whatever. But then the issue of where did it come from? How did it get started? Again, we're promoting this on Vortex today because it's important for Catholics to be able to say, wait a minute, before we get into any like passages versus passages, where did this come from? Why are you investing any authority in this whatsoever? So that's extremely important for Catholics to understand this history. Also, a reminder for tomorrow, Church Militant will be on the air here live from 8 a.m. until 5 p.m. in commemoration of the disaster of the Protestant revolt. So please join us for some or even all of that coverage. It's going to be very extensive. We're going to be showing you some of our premium shows that touch on the Protestant revolt. So we hope to see you right here all day, and then at 3 o'clock, is it, Simon?
3 o'clock.
From 3 o'clock until evening prayer at 4:45. Simon and I are going to be here taking questions live. You guys get to avoid that. So we are taking questions live about all sorts of things regarding Protestantism and this heresy and how it's infected the church so badly today, like other heresies have done in the past, but this seems to be a bit more extensive. So please be sure and make a point of that, and please be sure and come back for the download. Make it a part of your day every day, where we help you connect the dots and see all these connections. It is, as we say, the best panel discussion in the whole Catholic media world. God love you.